December 19th, 1981. The sun decided it was too shy for today as it hid behind the gray clouds looming over California. Many were bothered by the overcast weather. There were not many souls that ventured to the coastlines of the beach-clad state. However, enthusiasts and surfers wanted to take advantage of the storm swell caused by the cold, windy weather. Louis Archer Boren woke up to his alarm. Although most people would sleep off Saturday mornings, the curly-haired adventure seeker had always been fond of the ocean, and the ocean welcomed him. He planned on surfing the waves of South Moss Beach with a friend, expecting it to be just another typical day. He quickly got up from bed, ate breakfast, and said goodbye to his parents. He got out into the driveway and strapped his 5-foot 4-inch surfboard on the roof rack of his car. The board was colored yellow and had a black border by the edges. Coupled with the surfer's hands stretched wide while lying on the board, the silhouette from under the ocean eerily looked like a seal. However, this was not in Louis's mind at the time. He beamed like a child as he maneuvered the car out of the residence. Unbeknownst to him, this would be his last goodbye. He drove carefully, reaching South Moss Beach still early in the morning before the rendezvous time. The smell of the ocean permeated the air, promising Louis another excellent surfing session. Since 1899, there have been 6 fatal attacks from sharks in California, 5 of them from great white sharks. Although this pattern would easily send chills down anyone's spine and make them warier of entering the waters, fatal attacks from sharks are not really that frequent. Additionally, surfers know precisely the risk they're putting themselves in while practicing their sport. Unfortunately, Louis never knew he would be the victim of one such brutal attack. Inhaling the sea breeze, the two friends stood patiently on the coastline, peering across the lonely, turbulent sea of South Moss Beach. The two looked out over the greasy, damp kelp beds underneath the gloomy sky. It floated in large, silent rafts colored brown as though serpents were churning beneath them. The waves were blown out on the reef, scaling up to 15 feet high, driven by the cold winds that day. Not a single soul was riding the waves. How could they not take advantage of this, Louis and his friend thought. The two men pulled on their wetsuits, laughing and talking, catching up as friends would do. They paced along the coastline for a while, stalking the opportunity and getting a general feel of the atmosphere. Louis and his friend were experienced anyway and didn't share the fear non-surfers felt. The ocean was their home. The two entered the cold waters and paddled out into the open. Floating on the surface, they sat on their boards, waiting for the perfect opportunity. When the winds favored their request, they lay down on their stomachs, pointing their toes towards the surfboard's tail and paralleled their heads to the stringer. They paddled slowly and then quickly, sighting the incoming waves from their periphery. In almost perfect synchronicity, the two young men placed their hands underneath their shoulders, prepping for the exhilarating moment. As the wave warmly welcomed the two surfers, they pushed against their boards, propping their torsos like cobras, and in one fluid motion, Louis and his friend jumped to their knees. They took a couple of waves in this position, feeling the balance of the board, something they had done 1,000 times already, not realizing a sinister force was brewing underneath the surface. They did this over and over until morning faded into the afternoon. Eventually, it was time to go. Afterward, they returned to the parking area and enjoyed their lunch, talking about surfing, life, and family and other things that young men in their 20s spoke about. At approximately 2 p.m., Louis and his friends parted ways, not realizing this was the last time they'd see each other. As Louis made his way back into the car, he felt an urge in his chest. He dazedly stood beside his car with a half-hearted stance, thinking it would be such a waste to let the beautiful waves go. He bathed in the deserted scenery and decided to hit the waters one more time. Just another short session and then he'd go home. Or so he thought. Louis made his way back to the beach, pacing along the coastline and trying to get a feel for things once more. This time, he was truly alone. However, it didn't matter to Louis. The storm swell did not happen every day, and he wanted to take advantage of the great waves. He donned his wetsuit and began paddling into the open waters. The sound of the churning ocean filled the air, and a dreading atmosphere washed over Louis. From underneath him, a fearsome creature watched. The great white shark tilted its head, moving a few meters swiftly under Louis. The 24-year-old paddled and paddled, unwittingly swimming towards his demise. The fish around the area scrambled in fear, making way for the king. The shark appeared from the shadows, rearing its formidable head into the light. But Lewis did not see the creature. The gloomy weather ensured anything a few meters below him would stay where they were, in the dark, out of sight and out of mind. It moved like a submarine, precise, deadly, and cautious. The 400 million years of evolution taught it to become almost invisible in the ocean, following the movements of its prey. The great white shark followed Lewis. Still unknown of the danger, Lewis's fate was sealed at that very moment. Placing itself strategically a few feet below the surfboard, the great white shark suddenly went into gear, propelling 2,000 pounds of brute force towards the surface. The water exploded into chaos. The creature's massive jaws, laced with 5 rows of teeth, clamped onto Lewis as he paddled away at the water. It was like a train had struck him. The immense force knocked Lewis back from his surfboard, causing him to sink into the depths of the ocean. The single curious bite removed a portion of Lewis's left chest. Before he knew and understood what was happening, he was already dying. Lewis faded into the depths, instantly succumbing to his injury. The water drew its curtains, hiding the horror underneath it, and just like that, the eerie silence of South Moss Beach swept away the tragic fate of Lewis Archer Boren. December 20th, 1981, the following day. 2 surfers were walking along Moss Beach when they discovered a surfboard with a portion missing and the matching section about 15 yards away. The 2 surfers took these parts and handed them over to Salinas Police Department. Eventually, they passed it on to the supervising ranger at the beach. Monday, December 21st, a missing persons report was filed by one of Lewis's friends over concerns that his vehicle had not been moved from the beach since he was last seen. They feared the worst, and they were asking the same question: where was Lewis? Their answer was swept by the cold currents on the morning of Thursday, December 22nd. Around 11 a.m., Lewis's remains floated in a small cove approximately 1 kilometer north of Spanish Bay. After being taken to the Paul Mortuary in Pacific Grove, it was identified as Lewis. An autopsy was done. Severe trauma, left chest, shark bite. Lewis was bitten only once. Subsequent investigations of the bite marks revealed something even more sinister. Based on the segment chopped from the surfboard, a marine biologist concluded that the shark's jaws were 18 inches wide. This indicated the shark's length was more or less 23 feet, weighing 2 tons. They had no doubt it was a great white shark, and the largest ever documented. In all metrics, Lewis was no match. According to experts, sharks do not attack people purposely, as they don't consider humans part of their food source. In Lewis's case, it was more likely an exploratory bite, and unfortunately, the behemoth shark was never seen again. Humans have remained on top of the food chain for the longest time. Thanks to their highly sophisticated language, coordination, and innovation, humanity has managed to control the environment to their liking, turning their surroundings into what would benefit the population best. However, we must all remember the ocean is one of the few remaining places we have yet to fully explore, and those who aren't careful enough are in for a rude awakening. Whether a shark attacks you because of mistaken identity or out of pure hunger, when a shark attacks, there's a high possibility of you meeting your final affliction.
Middle Harbour is a beautiful natural waterway located on the north shore of Sydney Harbour, New South Wales, Australia. It is a large estuary that is fed by several tributaries, including Garrigal Creek, Middle Harbour Creek, and Roseville Creek. The area is surrounded by lush bushland and provides a tranquil setting for water-based activities such as swimming, boating, kayaking, and fishing. However, dangers lurk amidst the immaculate view of this place. Sharks are known to occasionally enter Middle Harbour, but their behavior in this location can vary depending on a number of factors, such as the species of shark, water temperature, and availability of prey. In general, these creatures pose a relatively low risk to humans, as the place is mostly enclosed by a body of water with limited access to the open ocean. However, on rare occasions, the infamous bull sharks enter Middle Harbour. These types of sharks are known to be particularly aggressive, and they have been responsible for a number of shark attacks on humans in other parts of the world. While bull sharks are not as commonly found in Middle Harbor as some other species of sharks, like the smaller Port Jackson sharks, their presence in the area does pose some risk to swimmers, surfers, and the like. But sharks are known to be attracted to areas where there is abundant prey, such as fish and other marine creatures, and they can sometimes be found in shallow water close to shore. Unfortunately for Zeta and her friends, they were at the wrong place at the wrong time. Zeta woke up early on a warm morning on January 4th, feeling excited and full of anticipation. Today was the day she and her friends had been planning for weeks, a picnic at Egg Rock, Middle Harbor, one of the more scenic spots in Sydney, Australia. Zeta had always loved spending time in the great outdoors, and the idea of a picnic near the water was the perfect way to begin the year. In the kitchen, she prepared the ingredients necessary for the picnic and arranged everything neatly in a wicker basket. She set it aside, ready for the calm, relaxing day ahead. Unbeknownst to her, this day marked one of the most gruesome bull shark attacks in history. As Zeta arrived at the picnic spot, she was greeted by her friends' laughter and chatter. She smiled and waved. They boarded the motor launch that would take them to their picnic spot. It was a hot and hazy day, and the waters inshore were clear. The breeze was gentle and blew warm air that carried the scent of the sea and the nearby eucalyptus trees. Eventually arriving at the spot, Zeta and her friends spread out their picnic blankets near the shore. The group shared stories, laughing and chatting as they enjoyed the stunning views of Middle Harbor. As the day progressed, the group decided to explore the surrounding area. Zeta led the way as they walked around the rocky shore, taking in the beauty of the rugged coastline. They saw fish swimming in the clear water and other sea creatures. Zeta and her friends stopped to take a dip in the water, cooling off from the warm sun. They took turns jumping off the rocks and into the refreshing water. At around 3 p.m., two of Zeta's friends, Mr. and Mrs. Bowes, waded into the shallow water, while Zeta watched from a distance of 10 to 12 feet away in the deeper parts of the water. As the two splashed and bathed in waist-deep water, they noticed that Zeta was drifting farther away. They called out to her, warning her not to stray too far, as they had heard of bull sharks being spotted in the area before. Zeta nodded, feeling a sense of unease, but she shrugged it off, thinking that sharks would never come this close to shore. Still, she followed their advice and made her way back slowly. Unbeknownst to her, a 14-foot bull shark was encircling her in the chest-deep waters. Its movements were quick and menacing. It silently glided through the shallow water, its razor-sharp teeth and powerful jaws at the ready. It was sizing her up. It sensed the vibrations through the water, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The shark bided its time and took advantage of Zeta being turned away from the ocean. It closed in on her, cocking its head from side to side. The shark darted toward Zeta and opened its powerful jaws. And then it happened. Zeta felt a tug on her legs, forcing her to throw her hands up in the air. The pain made her blood run cold, and she screamed in terror. One of Zeta's friends, Mrs. Reeve, was on an elevated rock. As she saw the horror unfold, she screamed for her son-in-law, Frederick, who was on the motor launch a few feet away from Zeta. Frederick turned to see that Zeta was being attacked by a large bull shark. He knew he had to act fast to save her. Without hesitation, he quickly grabbed an oar from the motor launch and leaped into the water, determined to scare the shark away. As he swam toward the commotion, Frederick could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He raised the oar above his head and struck the water repeatedly with a resounding blow. However, this made no impression on the marauding shark. It was still attacking Zeta and began pulling her away into deeper waters. It was a terrible sign. Frederick's instincts kicked in. He leaped onto the motor launch and frantically started the engine. The boat roared to life. Grabbing the steering wheel and revving the engine, Frederick accelerated toward the shark, hoping to ram the beast in the head with the motor launch. Despite his best efforts, this plan failed as well. Frederick jumped to the side of the motor launch in a last desperate attempt to save Zeta. He grabbed her by the hair, pulling her with all his might. He won the tug-of-war, but all that was left of Zeta was her torso. The shark had gotten away with her lower body. The water had become red with Zeta's blood. There was no way she could survive this amount of blood loss. Frederick scanned the water and saw Zeta's legs in the creature's jaws as it disappeared into the depths. Zeta was limp, pale, and hanging on by a thread. Frederick was shocked to see such a gruesome sight. He pulled Zeta's limp body closer to the boat, but the damage was already done. Zeta's eyes were starting to close while she bled heavily. Frederick knew he had to get her to the hospital fast, but he also knew that it might be too late. He started the engine and accelerated toward the shore. The calm, relaxing day quickly turned into a nightmare. Frederick knew that time was of the essence, and every second that passed brought them closer to the edge. Eventually, they approached the shore, and Frederick was helped by their friends, carrying Zeta to the shore. They called for an ambulance, but even as the paramedics arrived and worked on her, Zeta was no longer responding. They pronounced her dead. Zeta's attack was only one of the 6 that occurred throughout the years. These recent shark attacks in Sydney all occurred in Middle Harbor. But sharks are a formidable and dangerous species of shark that pose a serious threat to people who enter their habitat. More importantly, they pose a serious threat because they're known to thrive in shallow waters, as exemplified in the case of Zeta Stedman, who was merely standing in chest-level depths. The next time you go swimming, make sure to be cautious. Even in the shallow waters, you may just end up meeting your terrifying final affliction. 100 miles north of Perth in Western Australia lies Wedge Island. Comprised of almost 10 acres of sand and dunes, the island is situated 200 meters from the mainland and can only be accessed by 4x4 at low tide. From dry land, it looks like a small pocket of paradise. The glistening white sands melting into the turquoise blue waters are picture perfect. But beneath the waves lies a deadly predator, one which sends a shiver down some people's spines, and yet doesn't deter others from entering the water: the great white shark. On Saturday, July 14, 2012, 24-year-old Ben Linden and his friend Ryan Solis headed to Dolphin Bay on Wedge Island. They had walked for several kilometers to reach the remote surfing spot. They crossed the spit of sand at low tide and joined the other surfers in the water. The conditions were great, and they jogged into the surf with their boards under their arms. Others bobbed about in the sea around them, but what the 2 young friends didn't know was that Brutus was lurking below them. Since the previous Tuesday, surfers at the spot had seen a 4 to 5 meter long great white shark in the water. The dark shadow appeared below them in the crystal clear sea, and they nicknamed it Brutus. Fishermen local to the area were well aware of the large sharks that they had often spotted off the island. Brutus was no exception. Despite the knowledge that they were surfing in the presence of a marine predator, the surfers didn't refrain from entering the water. Nobody reported the sighting, and for those who weren't regulars at the beach, they wouldn't have known about it. The remote spot meant that there were no lifeguards on duty, and the nearest settlement had no shops, electricity, or running water. When you surfed off Wedge Island, you were surfing in a remote location. When Ben and Ryan entered the water that morning, they were unaware of the giant beneath their boards. They had been surfing for nearly an hour. It was around 9 in the morning when they spotted Brutus. They floated on their boards, sitting upright, searching for the next big wave, when they suddenly spotted the shadowy figure below them. It was lying near the sea floor. It was enormous, and the 2 of them knew the danger they were in. Females are the largest of the 2 sexes and can grow up to 5 meters, or 16 feet in length. They could weigh 770 kilograms, 1,700 pounds. Some individuals have been recorded as a lot bigger than that. Typically, they prey on large fish such as tuna and other sharks, as well as mammals such as dolphins, seals, sea lions, and sea otters. But scientists have described the waters off Western Australia as the deadliest shark attack zone in the world. The 2 friends decided that they had had enough and sensibly headed for the shore. But as they began paddling away, something sparked Brutus to attack. The two men watched in horror as the shark made a beeline for them. A fear gripped them when they realized the shark was coming for them. It was every surfer's worst nightmare. The beach was just 80 meters away. It was tantalizingly close, and there were other surfers in the water. Why them? All they could do was paddle as hard and as fast as they could. They were so vulnerable on their surfboards, hovering just inches above the water. There was nothing between them and the enormous jaws of the predator beneath them. Then, when they looked to their right, the terrifying image of the shark's dorsal fin broke through the surface of the sea right next to Ben. In that moment, Ben quickly pulled his legs up onto his surfboard, keeping them out of the water and from dangling near the jaws below. He instinctively raised his leg to kick the shark away when he saw the nose pop up next to him. But the shark lunged forwards and grabbed him around the waist. He must have felt sheer terror in those final seconds. Ben let out a yell, and just at that moment, Ryan caught a small wave and was propelled forwards and away from his friend. He knew his friend was in serious trouble and felt powerless to help him. As he was pushed along the surface of the sea by the wave, he shouted for help. He glanced over his shoulder to see Ben in the jaws of the massive shark. It was his worst nightmare coming true. He could see the sharp teeth clamp down around Ben's torso, and the young surfer struggling to break free. It thrashed its head from side to side, ripping him from his surfboard and biting him in half. The damage was catastrophic. Ben didn't stand a chance. Two jet skiers could see the commotion unfolding. They had been using their jet ski to propel one another on their surfboard into the waves. 22-year-old Matt Holmes could see the trouble Ben was in and was determined to help. He rushed his friend, who was trailing on a surfboard behind the jet ski, into the shore. Then he pressed full throttle on his jet ski and sped back out towards Ben. When he arrived at the splashing and the boiling water, only Ben's torso was floating in the sea. His legs were nowhere to be seen. His body was surrounded in a pool of deep, dark red. There was so much blood. He knew Ben was dead. Matt leaned over to grab Ben's arm, but when he did, the shark emerged and lunged at him. It bit down on his jet ski and threatened to knock him off and into the water. Matt turned and motored a short distance away, but he couldn't stop thinking about the man's family, or if he had children. He had to try once more to get him to shore. So he turned the jet ski around and headed back for Ben. The shark once again emerged and grabbed the rest of Ben's body and dragged him beneath the water, never to be seen again. Matt raced to the shore to pick up Ben's friend Ryan, and the two of them headed back out into the water on the jet ski to search for Ben. They circled the area but could see no sign of him. The area is so remote that there are no emergency services in the shanty town on the mainland. Police from nearby Lancelin and Jurien Bay arrived first, and the water police were called in along with Lancelin Sea Search and Rescue Group. They all joined in the search for either the missing surfer or the shark. Permission was given by the Fisheries Department to capture and kill the shark if it was found. Identifying it would be difficult, but eyewitnesses said it had been exceptionally large and recognized it as a great white. Baited lines were set just offshore, but no trace of the shark was ever found. It was last seen swimming off into deeper water. The loss of Ben deeply moved the surfing community and his friends and family back home in Perth. His girlfriend had described him as someone who had lived his life to the fullest. He had brought so much joy to all those who knew him, and his short life would live on through the memories he and his friends had built together. She and Ben had been together for 8 years, and for that she described herself as the luckiest person alive. She attended his memorial service along with hundreds of others. Ben practically lived in the water, and so his friends and family decided to give him a send-off in the waves. More than 200 mourners walked down to one of Perth's beaches, whilst a bagpipe played Waltzing Matilda on the sand dunes under a picturesque blue sky. A group of surfers, including some of Ben's family, paddled out to sea. And, as is often tradition for a fallen surfer, they formed a ring with their surfboards and floated flowers on the surface of the ocean. It was a touching and desperately sad tribute to someone who had been taken far too young. But there had been a worrying rise in shark attacks off the Australian coastline. Ben's attack had been the 5th fatal shark attack in Australia in less than just 9 months. Scientists were beginning to tag and track sharks off the western coast in a bid to prevent fatalities, but they gave a word of caution before everybody set out to hunt these protected species illegally. The rise in attacks was suspected to be in response to the growing human population. More and more people were venturing into the sea each year, driven by an enthusiasm for a range of different water sports. With more people in the sea, there was always going to be an increase in the number of human-shark encounters, tragically, some of them leading to people's terrifying final affliction. Corfu Island in Greece is known for its blue beaches, catamaran rides, and its picturesque environment for holiday-goers. Even back in 1951, Corfu's main form of industry was tourism. Not quite the Instagram hotspot it is today, but certainly already on its way to being just that. Vanda Pieris wasn't one of those tourists that came for the sights. She'd grown up in Corfu, and to her, the world had always just been sparkly beaches and rolling farmlands. She was the daughter of a farmer, and she spent most of her weekends working on her parents' small holding, where they grew oranges. Vanda turned 16 earlier that week, and as a birthday present, her parents had given her some spending money, a rare treat for a farm girl in those days, and the weekend off to hang out with her friends. They were under the impression that Vanda was going to spend the day at the beach with her girlfriends from school, and that she'd be sleeping over at one of their houses that night. Vanda was at the beach, but she wasn't with her girlfriends like she told her deeply religious Orthodox Christian father. She was sure that he'd have stormed over right then and there if he knew she was with a boy. But George Athanasius wasn't just any boy. He was a handsome senior, and they'd secretly been courting for the past 2 months. And today was the first time they'd be spending time together outside of the schoolyard. Vanda wasn't the only one who thought George was the most good-looking boy in school. All of the girls swooned over him, but George only had eyes for Vanda. She was pretty, smart, and sweet, and George already had plans to marry her one day, but he didn't dare say it so soon in the relationship for fear of scaring her off. George refused to let Vanda spend a dime. He insisted on buying them sodas to take along to a secluded outcrop that he knew was usually free of tourists. But to their dismay, they weren't as alone as they'd hoped. At the alcove, there was a wrinkly pair of German nationals enjoying their retirement and burning their pale skin to leather in the sun, as well as a couple with 3 young children. And on the water was a lone man rowing lazy circles in a small one-man canoe. The two quickly made their way into the pleasant water, swimming away as far as they could for their feet to still touch the ground. At least here, chest deep in the water, they could talk and gossip about their classmates, make plans for the holidays, and dream big dreams where no one else could hear. George had Vanda laughing in no time. The other beachgoers might as well have not been there at all. They only had eyes and ears for each other, for just one blissful moment at least. Vanda was in the middle of telling George how she wanted to study nursing after school, wondering if her parents could afford to send her to medical school. He was nodding along, listening intently, when his eyes caught movement in the water. Instinctively, he grabbed Vanda's arm. Vanda turned sharply around to see what George was looking at, but he let go of her arm, laughing at his overreaction. The coast had plenty of dolphins, and the gray blur he'd seen was probably one of them. He'd seen them plenty of times when he was out on his father's fishing boat. Excited at the prospect of seeing a dolphin up close, Vanda turned fully toward the open ocean, eagerly searching the waterline for a sign of the playful creatures. But it wasn't a dolphin at all. In fact, it was a 25-foot-long great white shark that had been skimming the water for hours. The children had left the water before it could attack, and it was just about to try for the man in the canoe when Vanda and George stepped into the water, reverting its attention to the potential prey that was fully submerged, making them much easier targets. When George spotted the swift movement, the shark was making a wide circle around them, hoping to come at them from behind. George had a bad feeling about the situation. Dolphins weren't shy to show themselves, and they traveled in groups, making them easy to see. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't any dolphin. He told Vonda that it might be a good idea for them to head back to shore until they could be sure that there was nothing in the water. A Coast Guard vessel just so happened to enter the alcove at the same time. Vonda relented, disappointed that the sea mammals weren't making an appearance. She struck out for the beach, straight at the shark that had now come full circle. It was ready to launch itself at the pair when one of them came swimming straight at it. Making the decision of which one to go for was now an easy one. Vonda, her head down in the water in a freestyle stroke, didn't even see the beast rear out of the water, but everyone else in the vicinity did. Like some bizarre scene out of a cartoon, Vonda's head and shoulders disappeared right into the gaping maw of the beast. Without hesitation, it clamped its jaws shut. Vonda only knew darkness and an instant of crushing pain before her life winked out of existence. Her beeline straight into the predator's jaws was a pure stroke of luck, both for the hungry animal and, in a way, even for Vonda. Her death was so sudden that she didn't even have a chance to comprehend what was happening before she died. The bite was so strong and final that it severed her cleanly in half, right below her rib cage. Opening its throat into a suctioning hollow, it inhaled Vonda's upper body whole. George flung himself at Vonda the moment the animal's red mouth opened in front of her. He grabbed her legs, but it was all he was holding. To his horror, he was standing with a pair of human legs, with no upper body, in his hands. The water around them became instantly crimson with blood and the contents of Vonda's entrails that were floating outside of the severed cavity that used to be her abdomen. George had about as little time to comprehend what was happening as Vonda had when a 4,000-pound aquatic cannon slammed into him. The shark was back, but it wasn't here for George. It was here for the rest of Vonda. When the force of the animal knocked him over, George lost his grip on Vonda's remains, going into the water head first. The next moment he was grabbed by the hair. Blinded by the water in his eyes, he swung his fists blindly, fighting off the predator that surely had him in its grasp. But it was Mr. Peroni, the captain of the Coast Guard vessel. When they saw what was happening, the crew raced over to the scene. Peroni grabbed the only moving thing he could see in the waters so dark with red that it was practically impossible to make out what was happening beneath the surface. That moving thing just happened to be George's jet black hair. The captain hauled the teenager straight over the side of the hull, but Vonda was gone. All that remained of the pretty and vivacious girl was a torn piece of intestine that was floating on the gentle red waves. Briefly, they spotted a single fin slicing through the water in the distance before the animal disappeared into the deep forever. George was rushed to the hospital. That single knock from the massive shark had shattered 4 of his ribs, but the stay under professional care was more necessary for the shock that the boy was in. George was so hysterical that they had to sedate him before he drove his own broken ribs into his lungs. For 3 days, Mr. Pierres sat beside George's bedside. He'd heard that the lad tried to save his daughter, and honestly, he'd known that the two were secretly dating, and despite their surety that he'd be angry, he was actually looking forward to inviting the boy over for dinner once they were ready to come out with the truth. When George was finally able to regain his composure, it was Vonda's father who wheeled him in his wheelchair to attend the memorial at the church. There was no official funeral, since there was nothing left of Vonda to bury, but the small community all turned up nonetheless. Everyone knew everyone, after all, and when one of their own was lost, they all mourned together. Vonda Pierres had met her terrifying final affliction.
Bantry Bay is a bay found in New South Wales, Australia. It is a very isolated area with very little development and instead was turned into Garigal National Park due to its areas of outstanding beauty. With thousands of trails easily accessible to the public, this bay is a very popular hiking spot with access to the water below. One of the most unique aspects of this area is the Aboriginal rock art, which contains about 82 figures depicting people, animals, and daily life. It is an excellent record of the lives of the Aboriginal people and allows people to learn more about a fascinating culture. The 1940s were a particularly tumultuous time in history, mostly due to the ongoing battles during World War II between 1939 and 1945. Throughout the world, people were evacuated from their countries to somewhere considered to be much safer. One such place was Hong Kong, where many British families were situated, and in 1940 were told that they must leave as Hong Kong was becoming too dangerous. 5,000 women and children were evacuated to Australia as a result, specifically relocating the majority to New South Wales. Many families were split up as the men were expected to remain in combat, later becoming prisoners of war. Although thought to be a haven for the newcomers, this was not the case for many of the families when they arrived. It was an incredibly difficult time and meant that those that were evacuated had to adapt to the Australian climate and culture very quickly and without much preparation. One such family was that of Denise Birch, who was 13 at the time of her evacuation. 2 years after Denise Rosemary Birch and her family emigrated to New South Wales, they began to feel very settled in their new community. The war was in full force, but they were relatively untouched now, aside from the fear of losing their brother and father, who were now Japanese prisoners of war. On a day much like any other, 15-year-old Denise and a group of her friends decided to go to the beach together. It was Boxing Day, and the group had enjoyed spending the holidays together with their families and friends, acclimating to their new surroundings quickly with an Australian welcome. The group ranged in age from 15 to 18 years old, with 4 boys and 4 girls. The weather was perfect. It was a sunny day with crystal clear waters that invited them to enter. There had been a few sharks seen nearby, but this was not unusual, and they had not heard of an attack for quite some time. They assumed that the area must be safe as there were no warnings posted anywhere to dissuade them. At 9 a.m., they left the shore in 2 small boats, stopping for lunch at Ironside Point, a small harbor found in Bantry Bay with sparkling rock pools at low tide. While the rest of the group was eating, 2 of the boys decided that they wanted to go swimming. They paddled away from the shore until they were about 20 meters away and the water was much deeper, allowing them to dive and swim without the risk of hitting any rocks. They were having a great day, enjoying the cool waters and the hot sun, the threat of war seemingly forgotten. Denise was sitting near the shore, trying to cool off and enjoying her lunch with the other girls. They were chatting excitedly about school and their plans after graduation in the next few years. Suddenly, Denise felt a sharp pain in her leg. She looked down and saw, to her horror, that a large bull shark had grabbed her leg. She screamed out in pain and fear, but was quickly dragged into the water, falling backwards and under the waves. Her friends saw this and panicked, screaming to the 2 boys in the water that a shark was circling the area. They swam away from the area, knowing that they would likely be next if they stayed in the water, while those on shore tried to save their friend. Denise didn't have enough time to grab a breath as she was pulled under the water. Although she had been in about 2 feet of water, the shark had been determined to take her as it dragged her further and further into deeper water where it knew it would be able to finish her off. She knew that if she could just get her legs free of this animal, she stood a chance of escaping with just the injuries on her legs. She struggled against the animal, but it was tightly embedded into her leg with no intention of letting go, knowing that it had its next meal laid out. Suddenly, the shark pulled her deeper underwater, holding her beneath its body to slowly drown her. She could feel that she was running out of air and began to panic, striking the animal with her fists, but instead of letting her go, it began to shake her by her legs. It ripped further into her limbs, tearing away her skin and muscle from her leg, causing immense agony. She tried to scream, but she was trapped underwater, unable to escape, unable to breathe. The friends grabbed rocks and branches from the shoreline and began pelting the shark with them, throwing them with immense force to scare and hurt the animal enough for it to give up. They hadn't seen Denise for some time now, and the ever-growing pool of blood that was on the surface of the water was scaring them. They thought of shouting for someone, but they were the only ones there. The teenagers were alone and fighting a shark for their friend's life. After what felt like a lifetime, their shots hit the shark enough times for it to flee the scene, leaving the group to watch the water for their friend. They hoped that she would struggle to the surface, gasping for air and needing help, but this did not happen. After a painstaking wait, Denise's body floated to the surface, dead. The friends entered the water to check on their friend, but she was already dead. As they pulled her from the water, they were horrified to see the extent of the damage. Her legs were torn apart as she was pale from blood loss, suggesting that this was ultimately her cause of death rather than drowning. They worked together to pull her from the water and quickly rang their parents, begging them to come and help them and that their friend was dead. Denise's family was quickly informed, and when her mom arrived at the scene of her daughter's death, she was beside herself. She was inconsolable, cursing the shark and what it had done to her family. Her older sister Pamela was already present, having been with Denise and their friends. She witnessed the whole attack and was in shock, unable to speak to anyone about what she had seen. The police were soon called, although there was nothing that they could do, and they removed Denise's body from the beach. It was determined that the attack was unprovoked as Denise had not seen the shark or antagonized it in any way, therefore ruling her death as an accident. Denise was buried soon after the attack at St. Andrew's Cathedral. It was a large funeral as the community came together to support the family and give their condolences for the freak attack. Her death shocked the public as she was so young and full of life, taken too soon. Her father and brother were not able to attend as they were still prisoners in Japan, but word was sent to inform them of the accident and the death of their family member. It must have been heartbreaking, thinking that you have sent your family away to be safe and out of reach from the bombs, only for your youngest child to be killed by a shark. There was another shark attack in the area soon after on January 4th, where a 28-year-old woman named Zita Stedman was swimming in the shallows. She was attacked and pulled underwater in a similar style to Denise Birch, except Zita was bitten in two by the animal. When the authorities investigated the attack, they ruled that it was also a bull shark, quite possibly the same shark that had killed young Denise. As it had escaped any retribution for her death, it believed it could escape another killing, so it attacked Zita. The sharks in this area were not previously known to be aggressive, but bull sharks are considered to be the most dangerous sharks to humans due to their natural aggressive tendencies. They know where they stand in the food chain, and so humans are seen as just another prey species to them. Despite efforts from locals and authorities, the shark responsible was never caught, and people were simply advised to stay out of the waters of Bantry Bay, as they would likely be attacked by the shark, where they too would meet their terrifying final affliction.
Great whites are truly terrifying creatures and are considered by many to be the undisputed apex predators of the open waters. Naturally, they are regarded as some of the best hunters in the animal kingdom, thanks in large part to their ability to detect blood from up to 5 kilometers away. Their torpedo-shaped bodies also give them the speed and power they need to swim up to 57 kilometers per hour, which they use to quickly ambush and take down unsuspecting prey with surprising force. Adult great white sharks have a lifespan of 30 years, a maximum length of around 20 feet, and can weigh up to 6,600 pounds on average. The largest recorded great white is thought to be 7 meters, 23 feet, weighing 2.5 tons. Great whites also sport razor-sharp teeth that can grow up to 6.6 inches tall. They are known to be opportunistic predators, which means they take advantage of whatever opportunity for food comes their way. Their diet consists of anything from the ocean's surface all the way down to the sea floor. And as great whites grow in size, so does the range and type of prey they go after. Smaller great whites will typically eat fish, rays, and crustaceans, But when they get larger, their diet also starts to include creatures like seals, sea lions, dolphins, seabirds, humans, and even other sharks. Nick Peterson, aged 18, was with 3 friends 300 meters from shore at West Beach, South Australia. The sky was clear and cloudless, a perfect day for surfing. Surfing is a water sport that combines the best of both worlds, the excitement of skiing with the freedom of surfing. Nick and his friends, Ty Wheeler, Adam Floriani, and Andrew Tomlin, all teenagers from Adelaide's western suburbs, had been swimming for half an hour and taking turns on the surfboards. As they were enjoying themselves, little did they know that a full-grown great white, almost 6 meters tall, with a viciousness to match its size, was stalking the group from afar, likely studying them, trying to find the easiest target, and patiently waiting for an opportunity to strike. Large white sharks were a common sight in the area where Nick and his friends were enjoying their hobby. Almost 3 weeks prior to the incident, 2 men in a boat were nudged by a 5-meter white shark as they fished 10 kilometers off the shore of St. Kilda, north of Adelaide. The next day, a shark of the same size terrorized fishermen off North Haven before making swimmers scramble for safety at Tennyson, Henley Beach, and Glenelg beaches. In addition, on December 2nd, a shark was seen far out in Gulf St. Vincent. Gary Biddle from the Grange Surf Life-Saving Club said he saw a white shark swim under his boat while offshore at Grange the previous weekend. In the hours leading up to this tragedy, Lenka Mrzlikova, a tourist from the Czech Republic, unknowingly witnessed something truly terrifying. It was the sight of an enormous black dorsal fin 30 meters away from the shore she had caught a glimpse of while looking out to sea. At first glance, she thought it might be a dolphin and decided to do little more than take a picture. As one of his friends was getting back onto their boat, Nick gleefully jumped into the water. That was when disaster struck. As soon as Nick's body touched the water, he was caught off guard by a gaping maw lined with razor-sharp teeth, lunging at him with unfathomable force after emerging from underneath the waters. The array of sharp teeth sank deep beneath Nick's flesh, grabbing him by the left shoulder and viciously shaking him around in an attempt to tear off large chunks of his body. Nick was writhing in pain, and his friends made the hopeless effort of trying to rescue him by hitting the water with their paddles, but it was too late. The vicious shark would circle around and then submerge with Nick still in its jaws numerous times before submerging one final time. Nick was gone for a second at this point, but before his friends could even process what had just happened, Nick resurfaced, and as soon as his friends shifted their gaze toward him, they were all mortified beyond words by what they saw. It was Nick, now floating face down, motionlessly, and with his lower half completely gone. Nick's body drifted amidst an unholy pool of blood, tissue, and half-torn organs. Immediately after the attack, Nick's mates raced south to the Adelaide Shores boat ramp. Minutes later, one of the teenagers ran up the beach in tears, shouting to swimmers to get out of the water. Later on, it was rumored that another smaller 14.5-foot great white was briefly glimpsed feeding on the vestiges. This took place while hundreds of people were present at the shoreline, and after a meticulous beach and sea search, the only found remnants of Nick Peterson were 2 small pieces of one of his lungs. Out of all the tissues in the human body, researchers have found that samples belonging to one's lungs are the only ones that may escape being consumed during fatal shark attacks. This is because pulmonary tissue is full of air, making it buoyant and causing it to rise quickly to the surface. If someone dies from the attack itself rather than by drowning, this phenomenon enables rescuers to determine what exactly transpired in cases where no witnesses are present. One of Nick's friends, Ty Wheeler, remembers that fateful day perfectly. "I was watching Andrew in the water while Nick was driving, and we saw dolphins," he said. "We turned the boat around and it was just so magical, so we decided to drive closer to them." It is theorized that one of the so-called dolphins they saw was, in fact, Nick's would-be assailant. In what must have been a difficult and traumatizing retelling of the horrible events which had transpired, Ty recalls that the shark struck so quickly that the teens barely had time to react. Nick's body was literally torn in half within seconds, and then a second smaller shark moved in to feed on the remains. Over time, the water near the beach became red with blood and filled with unrecognizable body parts, some of which even washed ashore in what must have been quite a disturbing sight for anyone present. The only thing that was found during the later search were some pieces of Nick's lung. South Australian Sea Rescue Squadron spokesman Fraser Bell stated, "The shark tore him in half and the other shark came in and took the rest." When asked if there was any chance Nick may have survived, Bell's shocking reply was simply, "None whatsoever." The police shut down several beaches in the area soon after the attack was reported. They began searching by air and sea at 3:30 p.m., sending patrols along the beach to warn people about what had happened. As previously stated, it was thought that the two white sharks had carried out the attack together. These sharks were reported to be approximately 4.5 meters and 5 meters long respectively. However, further investigation showed that only a single 5 to 6 meter white shark was involved in the attack. Local experts said that it was likely the same shark that had been seen near Adelaide beaches in previous weeks. Although white sharks are a protected species in Australia, officials still held a meeting on December 18th and decided that the specific shark responsible must be found and killed. On that very same day, Nick's parents, Philip and Leonie Peterson, were interviewed at West Beach. They stated, "We don't advocate the indiscriminate killing of any shark. They are to be admired, appreciated, and respected, and Nick knew that," said Philip Peterson. Unsurprisingly, two of Nick's friends had to undergo therapy due to the devastating trauma they went through, a trauma that may never fully heal or depart from their memories. Nevertheless, the tragic story of Nick Peterson is a reminder that sharks are a part of the natural environment. It is important to respect their natural instincts to seek food and not disturb them. Always remember that even though shark attacks are rare, nothing in this world is certain. Both tragedy and fortune are likely outcomes when spinning the wheel of fate, and no one should ever feel too comfortable in shark territory, especially if they are not familiar with the area. It is crucial to always be aware of your surroundings and take caution when swimming in an area where these majestic animals are known to roam, because if you don't, you may find yourself little more than a formless mass of flesh and bone, drifting atop the crimson-red waters, with your last thoughts being of your final affliction.